Thank you all for coming today. I'm Erin Neff with Regional Flood Control, and this is a very important date in flood history, the 20th anniversary of the July 8th, 1999 flood. Without further ado, I give you Clark County Fire Chief Greg Castle.
Well, good morning. I want to thank the Flood Control District, Regional Flood, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. They reached out to the department about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and said, hey, we're going to do this press conference. Is there anybody still left, because we're old, right, that was actually working that day? And I said, as a matter of fact, I was. In 1999, I was a captain on this very specific day. I remember it very well. I was working at the Tropicana and Boulder Highway area at Station 17. I was a captain on Truck 17. And I remember getting a call. It was just started to rain on that side of town, but it obviously had been raining quite a bit on the west side of town. I remember getting a call to go to the Harley-Davidson shop at Eastern and Sahara because the roof had collapsed from the weight of the water. There was so much rain, the water wasn't draining off enough that sections of their roof had fell in. And that's how that day started for us on flood responses. So we dealt with that situation, and as soon as we got done with that, which there wasn't an awful lot to do, we searched the building. There was nobody trapped in the building. We secured the utilities because of broken lines and water and power and gas and everything. We cleared and took off. We didn't make it very far. We ended up doing water rescues for hours down by the golf course and where the flood, the channel runs right under Eastern between Flamingo and Desert Inn. We had a lot of people that do what they're not supposed to do, drive out into water, try to play in the water, and they got stuck. Simultaneously downstream, and we're hearing the radio traffic going on. Other fire units are down there as the events at Miracle Mile Mobile Home Park are unfolding. We all see the pictures behind us. There's some much younger looking people. My associates from police and fire back there in those pictures look a lot younger, like I did back then. But they were doing those operations down there where the mobile home started to get sucked into the wash. And it was just a very dangerous day. It was a very big day as far as water rescue operations. But having been a lifelong resident of Las Vegas, born and raised in Clark County, I want to commend the Flood Control District for what they've done, because I remember distinctly as a young kid and as a young firefighter how bad the area of Charleston and Ellis would be when it rained. Even if it didn't rain at Charleston and Ellis, how much it would flood. And now we don't have those problems. And I believe, unless I'm mistaken, I think the floodplains have actually been adjusted by FEMA because of the wonderful work that's been done by the regional flood districts over the years to mitigate that water, capture, control it, and slow release it. They've just done wonderful work, undoubtedly saved many of lives in our community, and my men and women don't have to work in as many dangerous situations because of the work that they've done. So I'm very appreciative of that as a resident and as the fire chief. So with that said, I'd like to introduce from Las Vegas Fire and Rescue, our sister fire department, Tim Szymanski, their PIO.
Just a few words. I was working that day also. I was working a building fire downtown when I heard on the radio that a roof had caved in on the supermarket on the corner of Fort Apache and Durango. Didn't say why. They didn't say it was raining. It wasn't raining downtown. It was kind of cloudy, just like today. Didn't know about the rain coming. And when I made it up to the shopping center, it was definitely raining, and found out that nobody was hurt. But on my way up there, I was driving up Charleston, and when I got to Rainbow, it just was a wall of water coming down Charleston. I'd never seen anything like that. And I had a good rapport with the National Weather Service. I knew them on a first-name basis, was meeting with them regularly, so I called the office, and Ron McQueen was the warning coordinator for the National Weather Service at the time. He answered the phone, and he says, hey, what's going on? And I says, you're never going to believe it. You got to get a warning out to the public right now. This is the biggest thing that I've ever seen. This is really the big one. And it was at that intersection, there was already people getting up on the roofs of their cars and that, and it wasn't the fact that they were driving through floodwaters. It just came out of nowhere, and it was there. And I made it up to the supermarket, and it was the weight of the water that caved the roof in, and it was coming back down Sahara, going in towards town because the storm was moving its way west or east. And I remember when I was coming down, I stopped at the Citicorp data center on Sahara right there, and one of our chiefs was there. And the water was just flowing into that building like it was unbelievable. Never seen anything like that. And he says, what do you think we can do about it? He says, until it stops raining, I don't think we can do anything. We don't have sandbags, we don't have nothing. We didn't have anything that could touch it. I remember I stopped at one intersection and there was a man on the roof of his car, and I pulled up against it. My van was kind of big and everything was built for it. And I just told him on the PA to get on the front bumper, and I backed up and took him to a parking deck. I think it was UMC's parking deck, and just told him to get off. And the rest of the day, I was just going with crews. I was following them, and we were going on rescues. I remember Engine 6 that was at US 95 and Jones. Our department wasn't as big as it is today. It was only half the size, so we didn't have near as many engines. They got rung out to go down to Flamingo and Jones and Rainbow and Flamingo in the county. And they were there for 4 hours. And when I talked to the crew, they says, we just parked the truck and we were just rescuing people left and right. We never had to leave. I remember our staff nurse, Sandy Young, Bill Young's wife. She was the nurse on our department. She went out and she was at US 95 and Jones directing traffic, trying to get people off the 95 because at that point it was already flooded. People were stuck on the road. She was stopping. I remember we got a picture of her in our department newsletter. It was just pouring rain, and she was out there directing traffic, telling people to get off the interstate. You know, a lot of things changed since then. We had a swiftwater rescue team where just a few people and a few pieces of gear was on the department, and they would go around and they would rescue the people because swiftwater isn't that prevalent. But now we have gear for everybody that is on duty. So no matter where you are in the city, and I know the county is the same way, when there's a flash flood watch, they get their gear bags and throw them on the rigs, and they take them with them because we couldn't drive from one end of the town to the other. I remember too, back then we had sandbags in the fire stations, and that was kind of ridiculous. People were trying to make it to the fire stations to get sandbags, and we says, well, we don't want you driving to get sandbags and get sand. So now in the city we have the 2 sandbag stations at the east yard and the west yard, and we tell people you should prepare ahead of time for flash flooding. If you're prone to flash flooding, you should make your sandbags ahead of time, put them on your property, so when the rain starts, you can go in your backyard and get your bags and set them up. We don't want you out on the road. And what was amazing was by 6 o'clock it was done. It was all over with. So, but it was something that I never forget. So right now, it is my pleasure to introduce Steve Parrish, the General Manager of the Regional Flood Control District. Steve.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out this morning, and we appreciate the involvement and helping us get our message out to the public to be flood safe. We are entering into monsoon season, so this time of year we worry the most about flooding. Thanks to Chief Castle and Tim for their comments and sharing their memories of the 1999 flood. I really want to thank all the first responders at the county, at the city, Henderson, North Las Vegas Metro. All do a great job when storms like this 1999 flood hit. You know, it's their responsibility to go out there and rescue these people that get in harm's way. They do it without hesitation, and I really commend them for that and respect them for the job that they do. They put themselves in harm's way trying to make sure the community is safe. So thank you for all you do and for being here today. I too remember the 1999 flood. I was a younger engineer back then working at Public Works over at the county. And I remember that day pretty vividly. In fact, I remember the morning was kind of sunny. It was almost like what we see this morning today, but except the dew points were quite a bit higher at that point in time. So the monsoon moisture had already rolled in to the valley. And so the conditions were right. You know, all the ingredients were there for a big flood event. And sure enough, we did have one. Between 11 and noon, I remember looking out my window, and it was like it was nighttime outside. It was so dark. There were so many clouds in the sky, so much moisture that we knew this was going to be a large event. We are not first responders at Regional Flood Control or at Public Works, at least in the division I worked at. And so my responsibility was more after the flood, what happens with cleanup, what happens with damage repair and that type of thing. So I did a lot of tours with FEMA representatives. I did tours with Myrna Williams, for example, the county commissioner at the time. looking at different areas that were damaged. But the one thing that kind of stands out for me in that storm event, and there's video of it, a private citizen had taken some video of Flamingo Wash that was flowing next to his apartment complex. And at that location, we have a concrete channel that's draining into an earthen channel. And without getting too technical, we had a hydraulic jump there. And what happens during that is there's churning of flow. It's very chaotic. And what brings home to me is the message that these flows are very dangerous. These channels are very dangerous. If someone were caught up in that situation, there's no way they would survive it. You can't get rescued from a situation like that. And so the message then is, and the point we like to drive home this time of year, is to stay away from these channels, stay away from the storm drains and detention basins when it's raining. They're dangerous. You can certainly be injured or killed if you get caught up in them. And of course, when you're out driving, to be safe and don't drive through flooded areas. On that day, July 8th, 1999, we had a number of gauges throughout Clark County, rain gauges. We had 12 gauges register over 1.5 inches of rain. We had another 5 gauges that registered over 2 inches. And we had 2 gauges that registered over 3 inches of rain. The most rain fell at Duck Creek and Paradise, which is right about where a Windmill and Paradise cross. 3.23 inches of rain was collected at that one rain gauge. And to put that into perspective, our annual yearly rainfall average is 4.19 inches. And so we had 3.23 inches, almost 75% of our annual rainfall total came in about 90 minutes at that one gauge. Lots of rainfall in a short amount of time, very intense rainfall. So with that, you're going to get a lot of runoff. You're going to have water flowing out of the city. We had our channels, our detention basins, our storm drains were flowing at capacity. We had a number of facilities in place during the 99 flood event. In fact, 250 miles of channels and storm drains have been completed countywide. 46 detention basins were in place when that storm hit, and they all did their job. You know, they conveyed the flow, they captured water, the detention basins did their job. We had a detention basin at the Gowan South Detention Basin at Cheyenne and Buffalo, was 22 feet deep. Had water in it 22 feet deep. It was within 18 inches of spilling over the spillway during that storm event. So it essentially captured its design event. It did its job. Just downstream of that basin, there's a hospital, there's medical facilities, there's restaurants, there's apartment complexes, houses. All those were protected during the storm event by that one basin. And we had basins all over Las Vegas that collected water and conveyed water through the city. There's, to date, about 650 miles of channels and storm drains have been completed. We just hit the century mark on detention basins. 100 detention basins have been completed throughout Clark County. That's a $1.9 billion investment in flood control facilities in the Clark County area. So we're really proud of our system. We're seeing the fruits of our labor, I think. We're realizing that a lot of problem areas that we've had over the years are no longer problem areas. Charleston Underpass is a good example. Flamingo Wash through the Miracle Mile Mobile Home Park that had a lot of damage from the 99 flood. We haven't had any problems there since facilities have been put in place. So, but there's more work to be done. We have more facilities to build, which means we still need to be vigilant out there. We still need to understand that it's dangerous during these flooding conditions. And to talk a little bit more about that, I'm going to introduce Todd Lyricos, who's the meteorologist in charge of the Las Vegas office of the National Weather Service, and he can come up and discuss that. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Steve and the Clark County Flood Control District for the invite this morning. It is the anniversary of the July 8th flood. It was a very favorable atmospheric conditions that morning. While they were on the high end of what we see in a monsoon, they weren't all that uncommon. The thunderstorms began in the early morning, as was already noted, and the flash floods warnings began to fly as early as 3 a.m. in some parts of Clark County, but really not in earnest in the valley until about 10 a.m. Steve talked a little bit about the intensity of the rainfall and how much rain actually fell. But the other compelling factor about this particular storm was the nature of the thunderstorms moving from the west side of town to the east side of town, which is downhill. And so as water was running downhill towards Lake Mead, more rain was falling on top of that, creating an even larger flood wave. And so By the time the storm had ended, 2 people had lost their lives, and we had over $31 million in damage in today's dollars, which is a pretty impactful storm as far as that's concerned. So, in addition to the flood control infrastructure improvements mentioned by Steve, continued federal investments in weather forecasting infrastructure continue to pay dividends with life safety and the economy. A recent $150 million upgrade to the National Weather Service radar network is allowing forecasters to peer inside of thunderstorms and actually have better estimates on how much rainfall is going to fall out of them, which gives us a little bit more lead time about what's going to actually run off when it does hit the ground. Our computer models, which help us forecast the weather, are much more advanced these days, giving us more confidence in communicating the threat of an active day days in advance, sometimes even 5 days in advance, knowing it's going to be an active day, even if we can't pinpoint the exact locations. Since this event in 1999, the National Weather Service Las Vegas has improved the accuracy of flash flood warnings by 45%, and we've increased the lead time of those warnings by over 20 minutes, which is actually pretty substantial when you consider it an average. Combined with the flood control improvements in the valley, we are making progress. And so while the citizens are more aware and warned of flooding potential than at any other time, vigilance is still required. We need to focus particularly on children and teenagers, talk to them before flooding happens, tell them to stay out of washes, turn around, don't drown, and most of all, water always wins. We really need to get that message down to the children and the teenagers. Our messaging is working with adults, but parents need to talk to their kids, stay out of those flood channels, have that conversation before the rain starts in the summer, and have them make better decisions. So while the events of 1999 were on the higher end of the monsoon rainfall events, this level of event, as far as the rainfall, can happen again. We're safer because of our flood control. We're getting more advanced warning, but these events are going to happen and we have to be ready. And it's critical to stay informed through local media, through weather apps, through our phones, and by tuning in and listening to the advice of authorities once the weather actually does occur and once the event is underway. Thank you, and I will pass it on to Commissioner Brown.
Thanks, Todd. And thank you all for coming. My memories, the most striking memory was that Oscar Goodman had just got elected, so there was a big question mark on that alone. He shows up for the first flood control meeting, and afterwards, he was going over to tour here at the district to take a look at the screens and everything. So fast forward, we had a lot of fun with that. The flood of biblical proportions, whether it was an omen that Oscar got into office or not, that still is open for debate. The other, there was so much damage, I think it was in the tens of millions. We had a presidential disaster declaration, and it was truly a wake-up call, because up until that point, there had been scattered events over the decades, and certainly the facilities that we have in place demonstrated that it works. But we also had, as was mentioned earlier, we had the Charleston underpass in certain areas in the valley that became the poster child for any kind of rain event. And Steve mentioned the numbers. The most impressive, and I've been on the district now. I was blessed to serve with the city for 12 years and now with the county for going on 12. And the most impressive part of that is the investment this community has made in flood control. When you talk about 100 basins, and many of you that are familiar with flood control, if you look at some of the basins and the unique characteristics of some of our basins, what comes to mind immediately is the Kyle Canyon, that mile-long basin up there, and most of the Fourth Estate has great video from the Carpenter 1 fire when that flood water came down from the mountain, and in what happened up in the northwest part. You look around and you see places like the Doc Romeo, the Gowan and Buffalo Basin, where we were able to go in conjunction with the flood control and build a Little League complex. Up at Alexander and Wallapai, we did the same thing with the Majestic softball complex. 12 softball fields in conjunction with a major detention basin. And most of the year, you know, you drive by these detention basins and it looks like someone just took a piece of desert, moved some dirt, and dry as a bone. But we've been able to joint use those to the benefit of the community. Steve also mentioned that we've come a long way, but just in detention basins alone, over the next couple decades, we'll have to build close to 36 more detention basins, a couple hundred more miles of channel, and it's like a big puzzle. That puzzle is not complete yet. As the valley grows, so does our system. So we have at least 20 more years of investment. We've invested close to $2 billion. We'll probably match that number over the next 20 to 30 years, all for the protection of the community. And on the capital side, the mission of the district is twofold, is to build the facilities to keep floodwaters away from people and property. And we've been very successful. No question, 100% of the time, if our facilities are in place, they work. The flip side of that coin is educating the public to keep the public away from floodwaters. And as Todd mentioned, we've seen some success in that outreach, that education. Fewer people are challenging floodwaters, especially those that are familiar in the valley of the dangers of floodwaters. But we also surveyed the millennials, and close to 60% still feel that they can challenge that floodwater, and that's something that we'll certainly work on. And that's what today's all about. It's that flip side of the district's mission, trying to get the education and the awareness out there into the community. Absolutely must thank the Fourth Estate. You have been, you know, I look back 20 years, and in fact, if you go into your archives and check some of the meteorologists talking about flood control, it was new. Now, when your stations and newspapers and radio, you really get in depth into it. You talk about not only the reasons why, advance of any events. It's been fantastic, and we appreciate that, because when it comes to flood control and flooding and awareness, the media has great credibility. It truly does. And that's why we appreciate you all being here and helping out. We have a new virtual reality experience. Now, I don't do Disneyland rides, so I'm not going to try it. But Erin says you put that mask on and it's going to take you where you can challenge the floodwaters. But as Todd mentioned earlier, water always wins. And that's the message today. Just make smart decisions and remember that water always wins. Thank you so much for joining us today. And our last speaker, our newest member of the Flood Control District, City of North Las Vegas Councilman Isaac Barreau.
Hey, and he rolled his R's pretty well, didn't he? For those of you who don't know me, my name is Isaac Barron, and lifelong resident of here in North Las Vegas. I'll tell you what, why don't we start with our first Spanish lesson of the day, okay? Agua siempre gana. Everyone, can you guys repeat that? Agua? Oh, you guys got it. I don't even have to show it to you. You guys got it down pat. Para ustedes que no hablan inglés, pues les voy a decir algo. Me acuerdo muy bien de un niño chiquito. En los 70s, cuando teníamos una tormenta, siempre se apagaba la luz en Las Vegas y ahí estábamos, alrededor de radio, escuchando reportes que había inundaciones por todo el valle. Y ahí estábamos agarrando las manos y ahí rezando con mucho miedo. Y pues ahorita, pues eso ya no ocurre. For those of you who are Spanishly challenged, okay, when I'm, again, lifelong resident, I remember pretty well, just like the commissioner says, back in the 70s. I'm going way back here, okay? Back to my old bell-bottom pants when I was a kid. You guys remember those, right? Weren't they the best clothes? Oh my God. Anyhow, yeah, there were all these storms. Well before there was ever any flood control district, there were these storms. And inevitably, the power always went out in North Las Vegas, at least it did in my neighborhood. And I remember the family being huddled around the radio, listening to these reports of flooding everywhere. and you're sitting around praying, hoping that the water won't come into your neighborhood and take you away. We've come a long way since then. Those fears are not realized, I think, by the majority of the people in our valley. And that's a big tribute, I think, to everything that the Flood Control District has done. The wisdom of the people of the city leaders, the county leaders, more than a couple decades ago, putting together a plan to address something that was costing us dearly, right? But sometimes you're a victim of your own success. And what I mean by victim is we become sometimes kind of complacent. Now there's huge rainfalls, and you don't see, again, Lake Charleston anymore with people riding their jet skis around. You don't see, I was looking at some of these flood pictures, and actually my grandmother, her trailer is actually there in the background at that Miracle Mile Park. You can actually see it in the background. And I remember going right after that 99 flood, going down there and looking at the damage, and it was incredible. I was actually really surprised that my grandmother's trailer didn't get rolled down the wash with several others. Those of you who are new to Las Vegas, and especially like the young people that I work with, I don't know if you guys know this, I still work as a teacher over at Rancho High School. That's my day job, so to speak. They don't know what the flooding was like. And, they just haven't seen it. I will say this, one last thing also, just recalling things. When we talk about floods, yeah, it was devastating there at the Flamingo Wash, but there were spots all over town that were inundated. Right down the street from where I work, at Bruce and Washington, that was always a flood point. There was, if you look, you might actually see there was a guy in a Jeep, a four-wheel drive Jeep, who actually crashed his vehicle into the wash there because there used to be an open wash. Those of you, I see you shaking your heads, right? Remember that. And I'm so happy to say that you see a courageous firefighter, when they're pulling the Jeep up, this guy's body falls into the wash. And it's an incredibly courageous firefighter. Turnout on, water flowing. He still has his fireman hat on. That's what I call it. I don't know what it's actually called. He jumps into the deluge there and actually pulls the guy out. That's an incredible act of bravery. I mean, really, I'm honored just to be up here with the firefighters. And again, those things, we don't see that very often. So I'm happy to be with you today to talk about the new project. It's incredibly important to inform young people of flooding dangers. Even though the district is still building facilities, the water remains a threat, especially in the summertime. Now, of course, I work with millennials and now the Gen Z, that's what I call them, the Generation Z, Gen Zs, that's what I call them. And of course, what I think is really innovative is what the Flood Control District is doing to outreach to them. For them, you have to be digital. Anything that you do, it has to have a digital component, or else they tune it out. It's got to be something they can actually have on their little mini computer in their hand. And for this, I really applaud our friends here at the Regional Flood Control District doing this outreach. The virtual reality experience can save lives. You know that young people are our most vulnerable residents. They haven't seen these big floods. Many of them are just now learning how to drive. And, they don't have that body of experience to help temper their judgment. Regional Flood is working with the Clark County School District to get this into driver education classes. And it's also going to be available at some of the private driving schools and in mandatory classes for young drivers who get tickets in Henderson. I think we're going to look at that over in North Las Vegas too. Believe me, this is as real as it gets without putting someone in actual danger. I can't wait to try it myself. Thank you for letting me be here. Thank you for coming. And recuérdense, agua siempre gana. Thank you very much.
Aaron's going to take it from here. Just one last thing. Chief Castle, Tim representing the city, we're fortunate, not only with our fire department, but with our Metropolitan Police Department. In Las Vegas, we finished last on a lot of lists. But when it comes to public safety, what these men and women in uniform do for us each and every day as far as public safety, bar none, the best in the country. And I've been around them now for a long time, and to every man and woman that do put on the uniform each and every day, we thank them for everything they do. So, Aaron, take it away.